Donald Trump's approach to Ukraine has been one of persistent demonization and deliberate undermining of its sovereignty, setting a dangerous precedent for U.S. foreign policy and national security. Trump has consistently framed Ukraine as an ungrateful and problematic ally while signaling deference to Vladimir Putin. His refusal to support Ukraine's self-defense, paired with his administration's moves to weaken U.S. and NATO commitments, has effectively given Russia a green light to reshape Eastern Europe by force, leaving those nations and their allies scrambling to protect themselves. This shift is not just about Ukraine. It represents a fundamental realignment of America's global posture, one that prioritizes authoritarian power over democratic alliances. By siding with Russia, Trump is actively reshaping the world order to favor aggressive expansionism, making clear that sovereignty is conditional and subject to transactional politics. This sets a precedent where the long-term implications of this realignment extend far beyond Ukraine, threatening to unravel decades of international security agreements and trust in U.S. leadership. As the United States, under Trump, is aligning itself with Russia, Europe is preparing to defend itself against both. This new, evolving order may be dangerous, but in reality, the destabilization of Europe presents a unique opportunity for Trump and his administration to leverage a global conflict for strategic gains. Unlike past world wars, where the U.S. positioned itself as a liberator or enforcer of international order, this time the strategy appears to be one of calculated destabilization, allowing war to unfold in a way that maximizes American economic and geopolitical power while leaving its traditional allies weakened. History has shown that war fuels economic growth, particularly for the nation best positioned to profit from global destruction. With war unfolding across Europe and parts of Asia, the U.S. can capitalize in several ways. American defense contractors will see massive profits as countries rush to arm themselves. With Europe on its own, it will likely purchase U.S. weapons at a premium. With Russian energy exports disrupted or redirected towards America's new strategic allies, the U.S. can position itself as the primary energy supplier to select nations, controlling global prices. As Europe diverts resources towards military spending, U.S. industries can step in to fill production gaps in other areas, further boosting domestic manufacturing. A destabilized Europe would likely turn to American banks and financial institutions for stability, further entrenching the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency. If European economies falter under the pressure of military conflict, American financial institutions can acquire assets at reduced prices, allowing the U.S. to profit from Europe's rebuilding process. While Europe scrambles to maintain order, the U.S. can take advantage of its weakened state to dictate terms in trade, energy, and security agreements, further cementing American leverage over the continent. The goal is not to avoid economic pain, but to ensure the U.S. experiences less of it than the rest of the world, positioning itself as the only stable power after the dust settles. A third world war presents the opportunity to reshape military alliances in a way that permanently benefits American and Russian interests. A fractured Europe benefits the U.S. in multiple ways. Trump's administration has consistently shown hostility towards the European Union and NATO. By siding with Russia and withdrawing support for European security, Trump forces Europe into a defensive position, scrambling to build its own military coalition outside of NATO or the UN and without U.S. backing. This serves several purposes. If NATO fractures due to a lack of U.S. involvement, it will be forced to reconstitute in a weaker form, no longer acting as a counterbalance to American-Russian dominance. While the war plays out elsewhere, the U.S. can use the instability to justify an expanded military presence in Latin America, the Pacific, and the Arctic, securing long-term strategic advantages. If Europe emerges from the war severely weakened and dependent on external aid, the U.S. and Russia can dictate the new terms of international governance, sidelining previous power structures like the UN and the EU. By aligning with Russia, Trump effectively ensures that the U.S. is not the target of destruction, but rather the architect of a new power structure, one that is dictated by American and Russian interests rather than those of a unified Europe. One of the most critical advantages of World War III for the U.S. is the ability to control the digital battlefield. By standing down on cyber operations against Russia, the U.S. allows Russia to destabilize the European infrastructure. Cyber attacks on European banks, utilities, governments, and communication can cripple war efforts without direct military engagement. Through coordinated disinformation campaigns, Russia and the U.S. can frame the conflict in ways that justify their actions while discrediting European resistance. With war as justification, the U.S. government can implement sweeping domestic surveillance measures, limiting opposition and controlling dissent more effectively. Cyber warfare allows the U.S. to engage in conflict without appearing to be a direct participant, maintaining plausible deniability while actively steering the outcome in its favor. The ultimate objective in allowing World War III to unfold is to shape the post-war order in a way that secures American dominance for the next century. A war-ravaged Europe will have no choice but to turn to the U.S. for financial and military assistance, allowing America to dictate reconstruction terms. Instead of being tied to NATO's obligations, the U.S. can forge bilateral agreements with select European nations, ensuring loyalty and compliance. With European energy dependence and financial instability at peak levels, American corporations and policymakers can shape long-term policies that benefit U.S. interests. The war's outcome could leave the U.S. and Russia as co-dominant global powers, replacing the previous structure where Europe, China, and other nations had significant influence. Essentially, the U.S. and Russia stand to benefit from a war that leaves Europe too weak to be a meaningful competitor, while ensuring that China is preoccupied with its own challenges, creating a new global order that operates on their terms. The alignment of the United States with Russia is not accidental. It is a deliberate strategic shift designed to maximize American power by allowing conflict to weaken competing nations. Rather than preventing war, the Trump administration's approach appears to be one of controlled destabilization, allowing destruction to unfold in ways that benefit U.S. economic, military, and geopolitical interests. By withdrawing cyber defenses, undermining European alliances, and shifting energy and financial power into American hands, the U.S. positions itself as the dominant force in the post-war era. The strategy is not to win the war outright, but to ensure that when it ends, America is the last major power still standing, ready to dictate the rules of the new world order. But even the most calculated plans of the Trump administration, particularly in aligning with Russia and allowing the destabilization of Europe, are riddled with blind spots, legal risks, and unpredictable consequences that could send the U.S. spiraling into economic, social, and security crises. The assumption that America can manipulate global war for its benefit ignores the deeply interconnected nature of the modern world. An economic downturn in Europe would send shockwaves through U.S. financial markets, threatening a recession or full-scale depression. If NATO fractures or weakens beyond repair, America itself could lose crucial military alliances, leaving it exposed to growing threats from adversaries like China. Moreover, the legal ramifications of abandoning U.S. cyber defenses, actively sabotaging NATO, and possibly violating international treaties could leave American officials vulnerable to accusations and economic sanctions from European and Asian allies. Domestically, the American people, already polarized, may not respond favorably to a leadership that allows allies to fall while empowering adversaries. If war disrupts global trade, the U.S. could face mass shortages, runaway inflation, and civil unrest, further destabilizing an already fragile political environment. The belief that the U.S. can remain untouched while watching the rest of the world burn is a dangerous miscalculation. If European refugees flood into bordering nations, global migration patterns will shift, causing political crises that inevitably reach American shores. Additionally, underestimating the long-term resentment from former allies could lead to future generations of nations uniting against U.S. interests, seeking vengeance for betrayal. Even in the best case scenario, where war reshapes the global order, there's no guarantee that America will emerge unscathed. In playing with the world's balance of power, Trump's administration risks losing control, allowing chaos to consume not just its rivals, but America itself.